Picture this. It's February 1959 in the Soviet Union. 9 experienced hikers are trekking through the frozen Ural Mountains. They're all skilled winter campers, university students in their 20s, and they're attempting one of the toughest routes possible. Then, something goes horribly wrong. These hikers abandon their tent in the middle of a freezing night, cutting their way out from the inside. They flee into the wilderness wearing almost nothing, in temperatures that hit -40 degrees. 3 weeks later, search parties find their bodies scattered across the mountainside. Some died from hypothermia. Others have injuries so severe they look like they were hit by a car. One person is missing their tongue and eyes. No clear signs of a struggle, no obvious attack, just 9 dead hikers and absolutely no explanation for what made them run. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident, and it's haunted investigators for over 60 years. So let's start at the beginning. In late January 1959, a 23-year-old engineering student named Igor Dyatlov organized a winter expedition across the northern Ural Mountains. This wasn't some casual camping trip. Route they chose was rated Category 3, the highest difficulty level in the Soviet system. To even attempt this, you had to be seriously experienced. Dyatlov handpicked 9 other people to join him. Most were fellow students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. There were 8 men and 2 women, ranging from age 20 to 38. These weren't amateurs. Several had done expeditions in tough conditions before. They knew what they were doing. The plan was ambitious. They wanted to cover about 190 miles in 16 days, crossing remote wilderness to reach a mountain called Otorden. On January 23rd, they received their official route certification and left the city of Sverdlovsk by train. 2 days later, they arrived at a town called Ivdel, then took a truck to Vizhay, which was basically the last inhabited place before pure wilderness. They started their trek on January 27th. Everything seemed fine at first, but on January 28th, one member of the group, a guy named Ural, had to turn back. He was dealing with joint pain and some health issues that made it impossible. Continue. That decision saved his life. He was the only one who made it home. The remaining 9 hikers kept going. Based on their diaries and the photos they took, we can track their journey pretty accurately up until February 1st. That day, they hiked about 2.5 miles and set up camp on the slope of a mountain called Kolak. Locals called it Dead Mountain, which in hindsight is a pretty ominous name. The hikers pitched their tent around 5 in the afternoon, had dinner between 6 and 7, and settled in for the night. According to the plan, Dyatlov was supposed to send a telegram to their sports club when they got back to Vizhay, expected around February 12th. But that telegram never came. And when enough time passed with no word from the group, people started to worry. By February 20th, a search and rescue operation was launched. Volunteers, police, military personnel, and even planes got involved. On February 26th, searchers finally found the tent. And this is where things get really weird. The tent had been cut open from the inside, not ripped by wind or torn by animals. Someone had taken a knife and deliberately slashed their way out. And here's the thing. The tent was still partially standing, stocked with supplies, food, and all their warm gear. Their boots were inside. Their coats were inside. Whatever made them leave, it was urgent enough that they didn't even stop to get dressed properly. About 50 feet from the tent, searchers found footprints in the snow, 8 or 9 sets of tracks made by people wearing socks, 1 shoe, or completely barefoot. The prints led downhill toward a forest about a mile away. After about 500 meters, the tracks disappeared under fresh snow, but the search party followed the direction and reached the forest edge. That's where they found a large cedar tree with a fire that had been built underneath it, and right there they discovered the first 2 bodies. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko were lying near the remnants of the fire, wearing only their underwear, no shoes, barely any clothes. Both had died from hypothermia, but there were strange details. Branches on the cedar tree had been broken off up to 16 feet high, suggesting someone had climbed up there. The medical examiner noted that one body had been moved after death because the way it was lying didn't match the blood pooling patterns. Someone had repositioned the body, but who and why? Over the next several days, searchers found 3 more bodies scattered between the cedar tree and the tent, all of them trying to make their way back uphill. Igor Dyatlov was about 300 meters from the cedar. Zinaida Kolmogorova was found 630 meters away. Rustem Slobodin was 480 meters out. All 3 had died from hypothermia. Slobodin had a small skull fracture, but it wasn't considered lethal. It looked like these 3 had tried to get back to the tent, but collapsed in the freezing cold and died before they could make it. At this point, investigators had found 5 bodies, but 4 hikers were still missing. The snow was too deep to continue searching effectively, so the operation paused until spring. In May, after the snow melted, searchers went back and finally found the last 4 bodies. They were in a ravine about 250 feet from the cedar tree, buried under 13 feet of snow. And this is where the case goes from mysterious to absolutely horrifying. These 4 hikers had injuries that were completely different from the others. Lyudmila Dubinina had massive chest trauma. Her ribs were fractured so badly that a medical examiner later said the force required would be comparable to a car crash. She was also missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. Alexander Kolevatov had similar injuries. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles had a severe skull fracture. Semyon Zolotaria had major chest injuries with broken ribs. But here's what makes it even stranger. These weren't surface wounds. There were almost no external injuries. The damage was all internal, caused by massive blunt force trauma. It was like something had crushed them without leaving cuts or bruises. The official investigation concluded pretty quickly. The lead investigator wrote that the hikers died due to a compelling unknown force. That's it. That was the official explanation. A compelling unknown force. The case was closed in May 1959 without any real answers, and that vague conclusion opened the door to decades of speculation and theories. Let's talk about some of the explanations people have proposed over the years. The most popular theory for a long time was an avalanche. The idea is that a slab of snow slid down onto the tent while the hikers were sleeping, causing panic. They cut their way out, ran to safety, but got separated in the dark and cold. Some died from hypothermia. Others from injuries caused by the avalanche itself. This theory makes some sense on the surface. It would explain the sudden evacuation and the severe injuries. But there are problems. The slope where they camped wasn't steep enough for a typical avalanche. When the tent was found, it was still partially standing with gear inside. An avalanche strong enough to cause those injuries should have completely buried everything. And experienced mountaineers like this group would know how to assess avalanche risk. Why would they camp in a dangerous spot? In 2019, Russian authorities actually reopened the case, and a prosecutor named Andrei Kryakov suggested a delayed slab avalanche theory. Then in 2021, 2 Swiss researchers ran computer simulations showing that under very specific conditions, a small avalanche could have occurred hours after the tent was set up, potentially while the hikers were asleep. Their model suggested the impact could cause severe internal injuries without external marks. It's a scientific explanation that fits some of the evidence, but it still doesn't answer everything. Why were some hikers better dressed than others? Why did they build a fire and climb a tree? Why was one victim missing body parts? Then there are the more sinister theories. Some people think this was a government cover-up involving secret military testing. The area was relatively close to some Soviet testing sites. A few witnesses reported seeing strange orange lights in the sky around the time the hikers disappeared. Some of the clothing recovered from the bodies tested positive for radiation, though this could be explained by the fact that one hiker had previously worked in a contaminated area after a nuclear accident. Still, the mystery lights, the unexplained injuries, and the quick case closure made people suspicious. Could the hikers have witnessed something they weren't supposed to see? Were they in the wrong place at the wrong time during a weapons test? Another theory involves infrasound. This is low-frequency sound that humans can't hear, but that can cause feelings of panic, disorientation, and even physical discomfort. Some researchers suggested that wind conditions in the mountains could have created infrasound waves that terrified the hikers, making them flee their tent irrationally. It sounds far-fetched, but there's actually some science behind infrasound effects on the human body. Whether it was strong enough to cause this kind of response is debatable. There were also suggestions about attacks by local indigenous people, the Mansi, but the Mansi themselves participated in the search efforts, and investigators found no evidence of any confrontation. The footprints leaving the tent belonged only to the 9 hikers, no signs of other people. And the injuries didn't match a violent attack by humans. Some of the damage was just too severe and too specific. And of course, being
an unsolved Soviet mystery from the Cold War era, conspiracy theories involving everything from secret experiments to extraterrestrials have circulated for decades. People have written books, made documentaries, and created entire websites dedicated to solving this mystery. The Dyatlov Pass incident has become one of those cases where the lack of a clear answer just fuels more and more speculation. One of the really tragic aspects of this story is what happened to the evidence.
Public, but investigators discovered that parts of the documentation were missing. Photos, reports, witness statements, gone. Whether this was deliberate suppression or just bureaucratic mismanagement, we'll probably never know. But it means that anyone trying to solve this case today is working with incomplete information. So what do we actually know for sure? We know 9 experienced hikers set up camp on a mountainside. We know they cut their way out of their tent and fled into the freezing night without proper clothing. We know some died near a fire they built, some died trying to return to the tent, and some died in a ravine with catastrophic injuries. We know there were no clear signs of an attack by people or animals. We know the investigation was closed quickly with a vague explanation. And we know that over 60 years later, we still don't have a definitive answer. The most likely explanation, based on the evidence and modern analysis, is probably some combination of natural factors. Maybe a small avalanche or a sudden collapse of snow did hit the tent. Maybe the hikers panicked and made poor decisions in the chaos and darkness. Maybe hypothermia set in faster than they expected, leading to paradoxical undressing, a well-documented phenomenon where freezing people remove their clothes because their bodies are so confused they feel hot. Maybe some fell into the ravine, and scavenging animals later damaged the bodies. All of these things are plausible and grounded in known science. But the reason this case remains so compelling is because no single theory explains everything perfectly. There are always loose ends, strange details that don't quite fit, and that's what makes the Dyatlov Pass incident such an enduring mystery. It sits right at that intersection where rational explanations bump up against the genuinely bizarre, where the known meets the unknown. What's also interesting is the cultural impact this incident has had. In Russia, it's one of the most famous unsolved mysteries, right up there with any case you can think of. There are monuments to the hikers. The mountain pass was officially renamed Dyatlov Pass in their honor. The sole survivor, Ural, survived only because he got sick. He participated in investigations and interviews for decades until his death in 2012, always hoping for answers. A foundation was established to keep the investigation alive and push for more research. Amateur detectives and professional scientists alike have dedicated years to studying this case. The Dyatlov Pass incident reminds us that even in our modern world, with all our technology and scientific knowledge, there are still things that genuinely puzzle us. Sometimes people die in ways we can't fully explain. Sometimes the evidence is incomplete or contradictory. Sometimes nature does things that seem impossible until they happen. And sometimes we just don't know what happened. That uncertainty is uncomfortable, which is exactly why we keep coming back to mysteries like this one, trying to find the answer that's been hiding in plain sight for over 60 years. Whether we'll ever have complete closure on what happened to those 9 hikers on Dead Mountain is uncertain, but the search for truth continues. And maybe that's the real legacy of the Dyatlov Pass incident. It challenges us to keep asking questions.